So let's start. If you see this diagram here, I'll just basically describe the diagram here, and then we'll start, explaining in detail how these things come about. And prior to explaining this diagram, there are some very important intrinsic. There are some important background information we will discuss to. We will have to discuss, and this was requested last time. One of the background material is history of Europe. History of Europe with secularism cannot be understood without history of understanding, at least having an idea about history of Europe, because both of them are tied very, like we have discussed before. The word religion cannot be translated into any other language. That doesn't mean that it has not been translated, but for example, religion when translated in Urdu is called mazhab. Mazhab is not the same thing as religion. Mazhab means a way, a direction, it has different connotations. Similar with other languages, we have discussed those things before, so we will not go. Here, basically, this is how modern secular thought has started. If you can see here, modern secular thought, its roots go back all the way to the ancient Greeks philosophies, and from there it has incorporated many other philosophical thoughts throughout its journey to reach what we call secularism today. One point I would like to touch upon is one thing we really, like last time we were discussing, is we don't appreciate the starting viewpoints of from where these ideas start from. So I give you one thing I just really want to quickly touch upon is something that I gave an example last time, and then we can continue with today's objective. I wish we could go back fast.
I think if you let Brother Shahid handle, you can reach there fast.
Okay, so one thing we are discussing about is worldview, and we have discussed what a worldview is. I just want to try to explain that a little bit with the example that I was discussing with someone, and it came up, and then perhaps you can get the idea. Don't go into the details of this thing, but get into the idea of what I'm trying to say. So, for example, this is how we see the world, the reality around us. We have our worldly life, which is here. We know there was a life. There's something before our life, and there's something after our life, after death. Whether you believe in it, whether you believe there's a life after death or not, but everybody believes that death happens and something will happen after death, regardless of whether any thinking in fact, a materialist believes that after you die, all the constituents atoms will get recycled in the universe. That's their belief. So I give you an example. How does a naturalist think about these two aspects? He calls those things under supernatural, based on his outlook. A materialist or physicalist will think of it, we call it metaphysical. You see the point I'm trying to say here. Based on their starting assumption, a dualist, a spiritual person thinks these things belongs to a spiritual world. And a Muslim from Islam, what does he call it? He calls it the ghaib, akhirah.
But unfortunately, Muslims, we use these terms without realizing where are they coming from.
Exactly. That is the point I was trying to. Thank you. That is the point I'm trying to say. Please try to understand where these terms are coming from. They don't exist in vacuum. Similarly,
when we use these terms, actually we side with them. We support their point of view.
implicitly we do that.
Yes, without knowing, we are thinking ghaib and using a term which they use, but they are thinking something else. And
Exactly.
we are reinforcing their thought.
Similarly, I'm not going to explain this part of the diagram. Let's go to another one that I can tell you. Let's look, everybody has children. So how does a naturalist think about children? He says it's natural. How does a materialist thinks about children? He says material requirement for old age. How does a spiritual person think of reincarnated spirits of ancestors? You see what I'm trying to get at?
Yep.
So Darwin, for example, Darwin falls under naturalism?
Anywhere you want to place him, that's the different thing altogether.
No, but just wondering, like,
It depends on who is talking about Darwin. Is it a naturalist person or a physicalist
let's say
person?
you are talking about Darwin.
I don't.
You are asking about Darwin's own claim.
Yeah, like who is
Did
he a
he
naturalist?
claim?
Yeah.
Oh, you are talking about Darwin's own claim?
Is he a Darwin, is he a naturalist or is he
I would say that he will be close to
Explain the naturalism first, then we'll come to that.
natural. I would call him a natural. But see, we will go out of the this thing. But we can talk about it later on. How does a Muslim thinks about it? A Muslim thinks about it that a children is a requirement for both the dunya and the akhirah. You see, this is how a worldview creates meaning. What's the purpose of having kids? Depending on from your frame of reference, that's where you start from. Another example here, where I will wrap it up. Look at all those things. Travel, people get sick. You have orphans. How does a capitalist, a materialist, thinks through a capitalist materialist will think about it as an increase in capital. He will use those to increase his capital. Opportunity. A dualist economic system will have increase his spirituality. A naturalist doesn't know why why should I be helping people? That's an open question. You ask Dawkins or any of the hardcore atheists, why do we do things to help people? They don't know. There is his whole concept. What does a Muslim thinks? A Muslim increases his akhirah. You see from the world view, that's how everything progresses. And this is something that in today's world we have totally lost. If I'm talking about in respect to the Muslims.
Now, having said that, see the significance of Iman.
This is what I'm talking about.
If your worldview is not based on Iman, then how less significant the reasons or meanings become.
Exactly. And just to put a disclaimer there, people think that I put more emphasis on Iman and Aqidah, in my course of discussion. It is not that. I was having a discussion with somebody who says you turn everything towards Iman and Aqidah. It's not that I turn everything, other people are not paying attention to it. That's why you think I'm being over, zealous about it. I'm just trying to, because nobody talks about these things. So anyway, the discussion was, I don't know, last time, this is just leave that one here, that's for myself here. Just, I can point it out here, that in Old English Gospels, that, Bible, the commonest word for the physical world was Middengard, which literally means the middle enclosure, meaning between before life and after life. See how when you lose, the vocabulary, you don't have the original, you lose the meaning of things. The word world meant something else, prior. Now it means something else. So now you can appreciate why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has so well guarded the grammar, the vocabulary of the Quran. It's not the Quran itself. but the grammar, the syntax, this is well guarded, well preserved from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam down to us. We can see how words meant that time. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preserved the deen. How many of us would know what the word means in English 200 years ago? No, we have totally lost it. So the request last time was to give a background of the history of Europe before we begin going to that slide where we were talking about history of thought. So we will go to that point.
We can go back to that slide and start from the top, the Greek,
Yeah, so I'm going to that slide right now.
of the thought.
And then we'll come back to secularism here, and then we will discuss these things in detail. Okay, so this is the history of Bani Israel that we were talking about earlier. So to understand how this chart here, how the thoughts, ideas have evolved and landed in the modern age, is to understand history of Europe. When I'm talking about history of Europe, remember we are not doing a course on history of Europe. We are just trying to highlight certain points. So for that, what I'm going to do is, before beginning with the history of Europe,